BYU has found their man in Kevin Young, and people in Provo are cautiously optimistic. Why? Because they don't know what to expect.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and I want to thank you for joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every day. We appreciate you making us your first listen or watch. Reminder that you can find every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all of you everydayers out there, as well as the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. This episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I got a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. Coming up on the show today, we're going to talk about BYU, who had their introductory press conference for Kevin Young last night. We're going to look at the hire. We're going to look at the personnel and all of that, joined by Locked On Cougars host Jake Hatch. And then UConn got themselves another big to keep the good times rolling. I'll be joined by the host of Locked On UConn, Mr. Mark Zanetto, as we unpack that. All coming up right now. We are joined today on Locked On College Basketball by Mr. Jake Hatch, the voice of Locked On Cougars, not to be confused with Locked On Cougs. We're not trying to talk Houston today. We're talking BYU, and it's great stuff. Jake Hatch and I go back to the beginnings of my time at Locked On, where we shared a whatever our platform was where we recorded at that point in time, along with the Locked On Phillies host. So we have a kindred spirit in that. So Jake, man, we've had a fun relationship for a while, but today we're talking about the brand new basketball coach of the BYU Cougars. That is none other than Suns assistant coach Kevin Young. And Jake, here's just where I want to start right out of the gate. This is a hire that I think was off most people's radars, other than knowing, hey, it's got to be somebody that's part of the LDS church. So we're looking at that. Everyone thought Mark Madsen. He immediately said, I'm staying, I'm good. And then it's like, where do we go from here? Kevin Young is the man. So Jake, is this something that they're in the Provo area? Was it off of the radar as much as it was for a lot of other people? And now that he's been introduced, what's the vibe there in Provo?
Well, to answer your first question, we have a list that we kind of just keep as media members out here, and that they are active members of the LDS faith. It's just simply, it's the fact of the matter. You have to have that list. And there's usually about 10 names on that list. So Kevin Young's name was on that list, I'll be honest, Isaac, but I'm not going to lie. He wasn't in the top 5 of what I originally thought. But as it progressed and as rumors started to emerge that he was the guy, the more I talked to people who knew him, the vibe around him is he is going to be a very, very good fit here in Provo. He's a guy that wants to take a little bit of a step back from the NBA and the hectic whirlwind nature that the NBA schedule seems to comprise. And college basketball doesn't necessarily take a huge step back, but there are fewer games. Like there's 40 games all told really in a college season versus 82 regular season games in the NBA. So he wanted a little bit of a break from that. And I think that he's got connections to the state, obviously, and a connection to the faith and all that stuff, the institution. So it seems like the vibe around it is this is going to be a very, very nice fit, but obviously time will tell as he finally gets on the court and starts showing what he can do as a head coach.
And as we record this, it's actually Wednesday afternoon, just to peek behind the curtain. So we're actually recording before Wednesday evening's introductory press conference, which is taking place at 9 Eastern time, 7 local time. Jake, you're going to be there in attendance. What is it that you hope to or want to see and hear from Coach Young on Wednesday evening?
Well, frankly, I just want to get to know him better because, like I said, he's been a little bit of an enigma out there. He spent the last 15 years of his coaching career in the NBA ranks. He's worked his way up through the G League, the D League, and then obviously he's been an assistant, now the associate head coach down there at Phoenix. So he's got a very good reputation in the NBA, but we just don't know a ton about him. So I want to get to know him as a person and get a feel for how he plans to operate in the college sphere, because it has been a decade and a half since he was on a college sideline. So there's just a lot to to figure out about how he's going to operate, what his plans are for this program. So it feels like it's very much a true introductory press conference. A lot of times with these Isaac, I've done sports radio and media stuff for a decade and a half myself. And a lot of times you got to feel for a guy, like going in, you're like, okay, I know a lot about this guy and what he might do. This is truthfully, I think, one of the few that you're going to be like, all right, really, who are you? What do you plan to do? And what can you tell us about yourself?
And there's got to be some kind of excitement in that, Jake, some anticipation of like, that's kind of fun. The unknown, while it might be scary to the fan base, because it's like, what are we getting? I kind of like that in this day and age, as you're saying, where we know anything and everything, and their dog's name and their uncle's first wife and all of those kind of things. I like that enigma nature. And so, Jake, you don't have to share it with me, but do you have any questions just sitting in the chamber ready to go for tonight?
Well, number one is, and I think our rundown here, we were going to talk about this, but how he's going to run his offense at the college level. He's an offensive coach. That's his reputation in the NBA is he's an offensive guru. He's got a very good mind for offense. So I just want to know, because last year, anybody who watched BYU knew it was a three or was at the rim. It was very much an NBA-esque model of how they operated their offense under Mark Pope. And I just wonder, okay, looking at your roster as currently comprised, now that obviously is subject to change with the transfer portal and the like, but what does he plan to do? Because right now with what he's got in Phoenix, he's got a bunch of guys like Kevin Durant and Devin Booker who are very capable of one-on-one players. Well, college basketball and BYU don't typically have that level of players. So we'll see how he morphs, how he goes about running his sets when it comes to his program. And then the other thing I want to know, just in terms of asking him, is what attracted him to this job?
That's I love those great questions, and I'll definitely be tuned in. I need to hear your voice, Jake. I can't wait to see it. And what I really like about that is it does seem like he is just this very personable guy from what it sounds like, who has helped the NBA organizations that he's been a part of communicate well and be all together. And I'm excited for him to bring that there to you guys in Provo. So, Jake, where I want to turn next is forecasting ahead to the future a little bit, which is obviously a dangerous game because of the unknown of Coach Young, because of the unknown of college athletics, period. But forecast for me 5 years into the future, and I gave it that number just because that was the same tenure that Mark Pope just had at BYU. What is the state of basketball 5 seasons from now? Give me like a best case and a worst case scenario.
Best case scenario, BYU still top half of the Big 12 and actually competing for Big 12 supremacy on a fairly annual basis. They had a really, really impressive debut season. Anybody who watched how BYU operated this year, the postseason failure notwithstanding, it was a very, very impressive debut season. So if Kevin Young can kind of come in and just keep things at the level they're at right now, maybe elevate them a little bit more, that's where I think the best case scenario is for BYU. They're playing in the best basketball conference in the country, but it's just, there's no doubt about that. And if they can stay in that top half, maybe that top tier of Big 12 programs, I think that's the best case scenario. Now, I'm not expecting them to compete for conference titles every single year, but keep yourself up in that upper echelon and show what you're capable of. And I think it's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, he comes in, falls flat on his face, and he's out of a job in 3 seasons. That's the worst case scenario because, like I said, there's a bit of an enigma. He hasn't worked in the college game for so long. Could adapting to recruiting, dealing with NIL, the transfer portal, all that stuff, could it eat him up? And if it does, yeah, that could be the worst case scenario, that he ends up three seasons and done.
Well, so, I mean, Jake, you just mentioned it there. Let's talk about it. How hard do you anticipate it will be for him to adjust back to the college level? Or do you see it the other way? Maybe we frame it as a strength. I'm bringing this NBA mindset, as you said earlier, with some guys that can go one-on-one, whether he's got that type of personnel or not. Do you think that gives the Cougars perhaps an edge in a money-ballish sort of way, where we're maybe doing things that other teams aren't, that allow us to stand out in the Big 12 and at the national level?
Well, that's what Mark Pope did this past year. They bought in on the whole, we're going to hoist up 30-plus threes every single game. That was a money ball strategy, and it paid off to a large degree. So, yeah, I think Kevin Young's smart enough to realize I'm going to have to do some things that may be just a little different than what some of his compatriots do in the Big 12 that are better teams, have better talent, probably top to bottom. But the other thing about it is I like the fact that he's got this, they call him a hidden weapon, but I learned this just a couple hours before we recorded this podcast, is his brother Justin Young has got 20 years of identifying basketball talent as a college hoops analyst. And he also runs events now for top end talent at the high school level. So he's got a brother who's already engrossed in this on a day-to-day basis, trying to identify talent. You can tap into that, and that should help him get a leg up as he tries to adapt to recruiting, because that's a whole new animal he's going to have to adapt to.
And folks, you're kidding yourself if you think that's coincidental that the new coach's brother just so happens to have all that experience. That is a massive win, not to mention all those connections to some very powerful BYU alums. We've talked about that on other shows. So we've been talking about the hire of Kevin Young, Jake Hatch and I have. We want to turn our attention next to the team. What's it going to look like? How do we recruit in this day and age? We'll get to all of that in just a second. Right after I tell you that this episode's brought to you by Yahoo Finance. Wouldn't it be great if you could see all your investments and retirement accounts in one place? With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. I used to try and do all that on my own with my own spreadsheet that I made. It was so much time. It was so much trouble. I hated it. So a couple years ago, a friend recommended that I switch to using today's sponsor, Yahoo Finance. Y'all, legitimately, I've never looked back. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. So whether you're a seasoned investor or you're looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. You can securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor. Visit yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination. Again, that's yahoofinance.com. Isaac Shade, I'm joined by Jake Hatch, the host of Locked On Cougars. That's the BYU Cougars. Let's not get this wrong here, folks. Now, we have been talking about how BYU has just hired Coach Kevin Young coming over from the Phoenix Suns. I specify that now because we're going to move from talking about the hire to the team that he's going to bring around him. Because notably, Coach Young is going to stay with the Suns through their playoff run. That makes a ton of sense. You're not going to abandon your team that you've been with, but it does put BYU in a potentially weird scenario here, Jake, because of a couple things. Number one, the Suns and Timberwolves are the first round matchup. The Suns, the 6th seed. That doesn't tip off till Saturday. At the earliest, if the Suns get swept, Game 4 would be Sunday, April 28th. That's on the front end. That series, Game 7, would be May 4th. At the latest, the Suns get hot, ride this thing into June. We all know in college athletics that the transfer portal for basketball closes on May 1st. Obviously, guys don't have to commit by then. They just have to be committed to the transfer portal by then. So, Jake, how is BYU going to pull this off?
Frankly, TBD, honestly. And here's the deal. He has said, and the reports are that he is going to hire a staff that's going to kind of handle the recruiting portion of it. I've got a sneaking suspicion that may be some good news for a guy like Nick Robinson, who I believe is not going to go to Kentucky with Mark Pope. I expect Cody Fugger, who is the kind of lead assistant this past year, I expect Cody to go to Kentucky. But if Nick Robinson is still in Provo, it wouldn't surprise me to see him being retained on this staff simply because he's already there. He already knows this program. He knows the guys inside the program. He knows what the recruiting plans are for the guys BYU has been pursuing, whether it's transfer portal, high school ranks, or otherwise. So I think that he could kind of lead the way as they assemble the rest of the staff, hire up to 4 other assistants. But I think Nick Robinson could be the answer here because of the institutional knowledge that he retains from as that transition guy coming over. And Kevin Young should realize this because he was a holdover in Phoenix as kind of the one guy they held on to with that institutional knowledge when Frank Vogel came in. So I think he understands the value of having a guy who's already been there, has been ingrained in the program. So I think if all goes well, I think Nick Robinson is maybe the first official hire as one of his assistant coaches, with the whole thought that he leads point on recruiting, retaining talent, and the like until Kevin is done with his run there in Phoenix and can come to Provo to obviously take over.
And it's funny, Jake, to me, because when we think about the Kentucky side of it, you know, there's a lot of speculation of will they wait on a Billy Donovan to get done with the playoffs? And they didn't. They went ahead and hired Coach Pope. But here we have a somewhat similar situation, but where they went ahead and pulled the trigger with the NBA guy. Because to me, Jake, and I'm curious if you agree or disagree with this, To me, it's worth waiting an extra week or two or whatever it is for the long-term potential of the coach that you want, even if it means sacrificing 1 week of portal retention right now. Agree or disagree with that?
I see. I actually agree to a level on that, because you want to get the right guy in place. Now, BYU traditionally has been a place where hires take quite a while. The Mark Pope hire, for example, took over 2 weeks to finally get done. And a lot of that is because BYU has multiple layers of bureaucracy. And obviously they have to have members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints leadership. We're talking the quorum of the 12 and the first presidency. Like, we're talking the top brass of the LDS church have to sign off on whoever they hire at those positions. BYU expedited this process and got it done in 6 days, maybe really 5 days. So they sped up this process, and they had Kevin Young, according to what I have heard / talked to people about, as their top target outside of Mark Madsen. When you mentioned earlier that Mark Madsen removed himself from the conversation very early on, they were able to turn their attention right away to Kevin Young and get it done. It was lightning quick by BYU standards. And yes, I traditionally, I would say you want to take your time and get the hire right. I think that BYU realizes the talent they have on the roster that already had planned to return. They thought, you know what? We can't afford to have this momentum lost. Let's get a guy in there that we believe in. We're going to obviously push the chips to the middle of the table money-wise, because they're paying this guy $4+ million annually. Speaking of Kevin Young, that's a big financial commitment. I think that they're thinking he's the right guy, both short-term and long-term. Let's get it done, get him in here, and hopefully retain some of the momentum we had with this roster, keep it together, and see what we can do next year.
And that's a great point, Jake, because in this day and age, it's not just about recruiting out of the portal or recruiting in high school. It's about re-recruiting the guys that you already have. And so from that standpoint, even while you might not be able to make as much movement right now immediately on getting new guys in, you can get going on saying, this is our guy, hang out, stick around, because we got something working here in Provo. Jake, one last question for you, and then we'll get you out. We know that there are, though, some of the high-level guys in the transfer portal, like an Aly Khalifa, like a Dallin Hall. Is there any scuttlebutt, to use a Dwight Schrute word, that you've started to hear, or any news on the potential of retaining them? Or, like, I remember that Khalifa had a do not contact designation on his transfer, so we're assuming he's out the door to Kentucky. What are you hearing about those guys?
So on the Aly Khalifa one, since she's got 3 finalists is what the reports are. It's Kentucky, it's Louisville, or it's a return to BYU. I would imagine the BYU will do everything to retain him. He was an absolute gem that they got out of the transfer portal last year. Now, obviously, there is a large pull to get him to Kentucky to go with Coach Pope. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ultimately picks that. Dallin Hall is an interesting one, because the reports from some of the other reporters here locally say that he was already contemplating going into the portal before Mark Pope even left. He was going to look at NIL and cash in on opportunities NIL wise. So I think it's a little bit more of a long shot for BYU to retain him, but I do know that they have intentions of meeting with him. And then Richie Saunders is the other big name that entered the portal in the aftermath. And he acknowledged it was because of Mark Pope. He said, because of the uncertainty around the head coaching position, I'm essentially looking out for myself. And I completely understand that, by the way. Any kid, I'll say this for BYU and any other college basketball program, if your coach leaves, you should go in the portal and see what your options are just to protect yourself. I know you take a hit with the fan base claiming you're not loyal and the like. It's not about that. It's about making sure that you have options no matter what happens. So if you're to say of those 3, I think that Richie Saunders is the most likely to return. He's a guy who grew up here in the state of Utah. He has been a BYU guy through and through. So I think he's a pretty easy guy to retain on that front. Aly Khalifa is 50-50, I think, in terms of the proposition there. And as of today, I do not think Dallin Hall stays in Provo, but all that, as you know, covering college basketball like you do, Isaac, it's all up in the air. So we'll see what happens, but they are hopeful that all 3 will come back. But if they get one of the 3, I think it'll be okay.
Okay. Jake Hatch, great information. Thank you so much. Hope the press conference goes well tonight. Can't wait to see. And man, it's just one of those where you just got to rally the troops. We're all in, rah, 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 shish kumbah. Let's go Cougs, and we'll get on with it. Jake, thank you so much for your time, brother. Really appreciate you. Folks, coming up, UConn has found themselves another big man. They love this 2 big man platoon system, and they're going to keep it rocking next year. We'll catch you up on who that is and what it's going to look like in just a second. Right after I tell you about Monopoly Go. I've been told I'm a competitive person, and I got to be honest, it's really true. Just like all the rest of you, I got a competitive side, and that competitive side is a big old fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but on hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is, I love to mess with my friends when you do it. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like in classic Monopoly, but now I can also rob their vaults of riches all for myself. And the leaderboards, well, they show you exactly who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not my just competitive side that loves it. It's also the fact that you can team up with friends and people from all over the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go right now free on the Apple Store or Google Play. It's great to be joined here on Locked On College Basketball for the first time, I might add, by Mr. Mark Zanetto, the host of Locked On UConn. Mark, I'm sure you guys are still riding high. The kings of college basketball back-to-back years. What a run. But here's the thing. In this day and age, it's about, all right, on to the next, because this is the era we live in. We're thick in the middle of the transfer portal now, and that is the big news we're here to talk about today. We cannot revel in these national championships, at least right now, because we got to look ahead. And look ahead we shall with the news that Tarris Reed from Michigan has committed to UConn. 6'11", 265. He's got 2 years of eligibility left. That's great for consistency. We can talk numbers and all that. But Mark, where I just want to start is asking you, what is your reaction to this news?
I think it's first off, thanks for bringing me on. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, for us, we've been following it pretty closely, obviously. We had a gentleman from Rivals that's been covering him for 2 years. Tarris Reed Jr. is not a sexy pick, but it doesn't make me pause at all because that's kind of what Dan Hurley likes to do. I don't think anyone knew who Cam Spencer was unless you're a diehard college basketball fan, which I hope we obviously have and fans in our shows. But if you're in the weeds, maybe you thought Cam could come in and do the things that he did for UConn. I don't know if Tarris Reed is that guy, but he definitely is a great piece for us when you dive into what he could become at UConn, not what he is currently.
So, Mark, what's that process then? How do you move him from what he is currently to what he could become under the tutelage of Danny Hurley and Luke Murray and the rest of the coaching staff?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. There's the crazy comp is people on the UConn side who I've talked to even before he made the commitment, I believe this morning. There's a comp that he's got footwork that is very similar to Adama Sanogo.
Wow.
And so what they're talking about with that type of touch, he with the ability to use both hands. Adama wasn't a finished product before he got to UConn. So his ascension to now having a 2020 game in the NBA recently is really what they're looking for, because this offense is very fast-paced. It's very NBA ready, Golden State Warriors, although not last night. FIBA European style. It's not dump it into the paint and kind of like just like couple dribbles, jump hook. These guys move. Their footwork is very important. So I think I have to imagine his size, his ability to rebound, his really smart kid, accomplished saxophonist, like he's an entrepreneur. Like I feel like they look a lot deeper into just his skills on the court. His ability to process information quickly is what they want.
Man, that seems to make sense with the UConn way right now, and you love it and you expect it. So numbers last year for Tarris Reed: 9 points a game, 7.2 rebounds, 2.5 of which were on the offensive glass. You love to see that. 1.4 blocks a game. Those are some of the good, some of the things that he needs to grow in. 58.6% at the free throw line. We obviously want to see that come up, as well as his turnovers per game, just over 2 a game. Mark, as you look at this, you look at these last 2 years, you mentioned Adama Sanogo. I love that because the first championship in the 22-23 season, it was the Sanogo Clingan dual front court. This past year, it's Clingan and it's Samson Johnson. And so we look ahead to what this could be next year. And what do you make of continuing on with this platoon front court system that we probably will see continue on?
Yeah, actually, and if you're a UConn fan, you probably want to know about Yosef Singhair as well, who's another 6'11" guy. who they are very high on. Another great footwork guy. They're all very similar. I think Tarris Reed Jr. gives a different type of element because he's got some beef on him. He's almost 270 pounds. Although if you get put into a Dan Hurley camp, he may lose 10 pounds with all the running they do. So, at the minimum, he comes into camp maybe, that's big. He's 260 in his playing weight. I think you could see a three-headed monster this year because if you get 9 points from him, maybe Samson makes a leap and is close to a 10-point score. He was 5.4 points a game at 16 minutes. I think that what they love about Tarris Reed is he doesn't get in foul trouble. Like even in the Big Ten,
critical.
He rarely fouled out, and that was something that Samson Johnson had a lot of issues with. Yosef Singh here, we don't have a lot of tape on, so we don't know what he's going to be like. So having three guys above 6'10" who can be a part of this offense is really what they're looking for. There are no Donovan Clingans that grow on trees every year, right? He's a once in a generational talent, comes in 2 years, 2 championships, have a great career. We're not getting that guy back, right? So a guy of the same caliber as Samson or Yosef is kind of a dream really for them to get this guy this quickly in the transfer portal.
And Mark, what's so interesting about what you just said there to me is that seems like it's the Hurley way right now, is whereas a lot of programs are out here just cherry picking, like, who is the best talent I can get? What I've been really impressed about with UConn, especially this year, is you mentioned Cam Spencer, right? Like it's these complementary parts that it's like, we know we've got our Tristan Newton, we know we've got our Caravan or whatever it is. And then we just want to find these complementary pieces. And it feels like that's the kind of thing that Tarris Reed really could be. So while you said maybe he's not a sexy pick, I think probably a lot of people said the same thing about Cam Spencer this time last year. And so we look at that and forecast ahead, and it just feels like Dan Hurley's going to continue to do this. What is it that's allowing them to identify and then go get those complementary pieces that rather than being the 5 best players, it's the best 5 of a group?
Yeah, I think what I've heard Dan Hurley say this in interviews, and then I'll give you a euphemism that I use all the time in my own personal life. You have a family, I have a family. How much more money do you spend at the grocery store if you shop hungry? When you're full and you have a full belly and you have your budget and you know what you're going to spend, you don't ever shop, oh, I want this, I want that, I want this. No. They have a very tried and true system. They've just won back-to-back national championships. They don't shop hungry when they're in the transfer portal or recruiting. The other thing I would say is they know exactly what they're looking for because they recruit parents before they recruit the players. So he said that on Good Morning America. He said it in multiple interviews. If you do background research on any of these kids, if you see any red flags, they've transferred 2, 3, 4 times, maybe 4 or 5 different high school coaches, they're probably not coming to UConn because one bad recruit, one bad transfer can kind of take down the whole organization. So I think that's a huge advantage that they're having over other teams is they're not just throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, 100% love it. What a great approach. And it's like, why can't other people do that? Well, maybe they're short-circuiting. There's all these options and reasons, but then once you've established that culture and people are going to want to come be part of it, it just keeps on rolling. Mark, last question for you, and we'll get you out of here. When you start to think about the rest of the shape of the roster, just like after last year's championship, there are guys that are headed out, either out of eligibility or moving on to the pros or whatever it is. For you right now, how is this roster shaping up ahead of the 24-25 season?
I think it's in good shape. I the way too early rankings, I've seen them anywhere from a ridiculous rank number 1, which I think is a lot, to 5 to 10, somewhere in that range. If they hit on one more transfer, if they get Liam McNeely, who's a 5-star recruit, All-American that's visiting next week, there's also a school of thought that, hey, listen, you have Solo Ball, you have Jalen Stewart, you have Jaden Ross, Yusef Singh here. These were your Fab 5 freshmen with Steph Castle. Why not let them, take a stab at it? Get maybe Tarris Reed, maybe one more recruit or transfer portal guy, and just roll the dice with your freshmen. It's hard to say no to Kobe Brea if he wants to come to UConn. 50% 3-point shooter, kind of a Cam replacement, if you will. 6'5" big guard from Dayton, New York City kid. So that's what I would say is whatever school of thought, I'm going to roll with it because back-to-back titles, you really can't argue with it. But I think we're going to be in good shape. Top 20, top 15 team that's competitive and is in the hunt for another Big East championship.
I love it, Mark Zanetto, and I'm right with you. If I'm Kobe Brea, I am salivating at that Cam Spencer role right now. Let me get in there. Would love to see him attempt more twos than 45 that he had last year, but we'll see what happens. I don't think Danny Hurley would let him sit completely outside like he has done at Dayton, but boy, that would be a big pick up from that sharp shooting standpoint. Mark Zanetto, thank you so much. We're going to obviously keep tabs on the shape of the UConn roster throughout the offseason, but a big pickup in Tarris Reed on Wednesday. Thanks so much for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen every day. My big thanks to our guests today, Jake Hatch and Mark Zanetto. Make sure you check out their great work on their shows. If you haven't subscribed to the show on video and audio platforms, do that right now. It's so easy to be able to do. Also, if you're not part of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community, we're talking about this all the time, even all offseason. As always, apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and until tomorrow, peace.